coming. Eliza, congratulations on your book, which came out today.
Yes.
Whatever you say. It really means so much for me to have my family here and friends and neighbors. So what has launch day been like?
I mean, it's like it's really like it's sort of like very like it's like a roller coaster, like you're feeling very, very like emotional, and you're getting a lot of messages obviously from friends, which is really nice, like thanking everybody, like all like amazing publishing team, my agent, like talking to them, like just having just really grateful, honestly, I would say, just like overflow right into it.
That's awesome. So you've written a thriller set in the horse world. Can you tell us how this book came to be?
Yeah, so this is going to touch on some of your questions because I already kind of did keep your questions, right? So I started writing when I was like around 5 years old, and I've been in the horse world, like kind of on and off, I guess, since then. But this specific book was inspired by the time that I spent. I was a riding instructor in Orange County and in Los Angeles, and I used to kind of like teach the children of like the rich and famous, and I would observe these different kind of parent-child dynamics. And it was just really interesting. I kind of got the spark of the idea from that because like there'd be like, specifically there was this one mother who, when she was younger, she had always wanted to be able to ride horses, and she could never afford it. And then she had married into money, and now she could give that dream to her kid. And her kid was actually this little boy who had absolutely zero interest in it, like more than any other student I've ever had, to the point where he would have lessons where we would just hang out with the horse. And the mom was happy with that, like just because, it was sort of like her dream to give to him. And it just kind of inspired me because it just made me think that, having dreams for your children, I don't think that's like a wrong thing, right? It's kind of like a beautiful thing to want to give them this kind of gift of this life that you never had. But at the same time, it doesn't always sort of go the way you planned, and it can also become toxic or even dangerous.
The dangerous element of it felt really scary to me as someone who didn't grow up around horses. Like these girls are being like thrown off their horses and dragged through fences. Is that like true to your experience?
Oh, totally. Like when I was younger, when I was a kid, I went through this phase where I would fall off like multiple times a week. Which like when you're a kid, they're kind of like bendy and But now as an adult, that doesn't. I haven't fallen in a long time. But yeah, it's totally like a realistic thing. Like the kind of like how I described in the book, like how people have like falls that are like stories that you like tell everyone. You're like, one time, like my horse, for example, like once like bumped me out of the arena. So like I like landed outside of the arena, and that was like my like cool story. Terrifying. So it's definitely a thing you like sort of share and like kind of brag about in a way.
So how did you go from, okay, you're in the world of horses, you're inspired by these people, to like, let's set a murder there?
Well, so this is the thing, honestly, like this is why it probably took me so long to write this book, is because like I write thrillers. So it was kind of hard for me to be like, okay, well, how can I see like what's the thriller in that sport? Because I've actually had, I would say, like an overwhelmingly positive experience like in that sport, and like in the people that I've worked with, and like the like riders and parents and everything I've interacted with. So like part of me was kind of like protective and like kind of like, well, I'm not sure if I want to really do that. But I think that this book, I kind of was inspired by like the sort of setup in like the Big Little Lies, where you kind of have like a murder that happens at the end, and you're kind of getting there. But at the same time, it's very much like a character story, right? So you're learning about all these characters and following kind of like their journeys. And then you get, you're going somewhere, and it's going to be like bad, but it's not like sort of this crazy, like,
Totally, like it's not action through the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of the structure of it, it is like multiple points of view. It is a mystery. So what's your process? Like, are you an outliner? Like, did you know what the plot twists were going to be going into it, or are you just like vibes?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like outlining has never really worked for me, because I feel like when I outline, like I tend to feel like I have to like stick to exactly what I said. Like I feel like I almost have to like prove that I can do what I said I was going to do, and so it comes out like a little bit like it's not as organic. Like it can be really flat. So I don't tend to outline. The interesting thing about this book is that it was actually a completely different book originally. I actually rewrote the entire book. So when I first pitched it, I sold it on 3 chapters and like the pitch. And so because I was like writing 3 chapters, you want to make sure that they buy it. So I was like, let's make sure that like so much happens in these first chapters. So like somebody died, like, you know, like everything kind of like went off. It was like at a horse show, it was like super high octane, right? And so I'm trying to write this book and it almost felt like we could never get to that point again. So like the rest of the book just didn't feel like it was sort of going anywhere. And it kind of got to this point with my editor, we were kind of going back and forth and it felt like we were going in circles. And I started to panic because I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even like this book anymore. Like, I know they don't really like it. You know what I mean? Like, at this point, it's like, this is not working. So I was like, reaching out to all my author friends. I'm like, what do I do? Like, this is my career is over. Like, of course, you're just like so dramatic. Like, they're gonna like walk away from my contract. Like, this is crazy. And then I just decided to like try to redo the entire thing. So I sent my editor like 10,000 words of a new version that I kind of just structured differently just to make it, you know, easier for me for it to be good. And I sent it to her like over the weekend. She got back to me like on Monday and was like, yeah, like go for it. So I rewrote the whole book, then did another big edit, and then finally it was done. So yeah, it was like honestly probably the hardest process I've ever had. And then the other hard thing is because it's 5 different characters, it's almost like you're writing 5 different novels that are happening at the same time that affect each other. So if I like change anything, it would have this massive like knockdown effect. So it was really tricky for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure. Like, how did you keep everything straight?
I don't know. Okay.
No, you did. You definitely did.
I mean, no, it was tricky. I think like it was like I did try to make things like organically come from the characters, and then I tried to do like individual edits for each character. You know what I mean? So I'd like start with who I thought was kind of the main character, and I'd go down from there and just go through the entire book that way, and then go over it like this sort of looking at everybody way, just to make sure it was working on every single level.
Did you have characters that you loved the most?
No, not the most. I feel like I tried, like, I felt like because I was doing an ensemble, it was really important to me that I give, like, every character something that, like, I could relate to so that I wouldn't, like, kind of leave anybody out. So it would feel, like, really like an ensemble. Mm-hmm. Like, it wouldn't feel like one character was, like, it was one character's story and everyone else was just there, you know?
Yeah, totally. One of the things that I loved most about it was the sister relationship. Mm-hmm. And I just learned that you have 2 sisters.
Yeah, I actually have 3. Wait.
3? Oh my God.
Sorry, I'm like, it's been a long day. It's like the numbers are right. Yeah. So I have 2 here, and then I have 1 in here.
So how much of real life sister relationship?
Well, I'm the oldest, so I'm the perfect one.
Okay.
I mean, no, I love relationships like between, like sisters, between girls. Like, I love like talking about that because I feel like it's such like a complicated thing in your family, especially like talking about family relationships. And even like within the context of like the barn and the horse stable, it's like they're kind of family. And I feel like those relationships are the ones that mean the most. They're the most complicated and the most sometimes emotional, especially when you're like a teenage girl, you know?
Yeah, totally. As someone with sisters, I do know.
Yeah.
And it also feels like the character development, like, can only happen the way it does because it's a sister relationship. Mm-hmm. Like, it happens in conversation with each other, which I thought was felt really real to me. Yeah. So were there parts that you found really emotional to write?
I mean, I feel like it's all kind of like I get into it. You know what I mean? I mean, obviously, it's like the sort of the ending. I think is spoiler alert. Somebody does die. It's sad. So I would say, like that kind of thing. And I really like felt like it was important to make sure that death didn't just feel like, oh, she said someone was going to die, and it wasn't even an important character, and like you know what I mean? Like I wanted to make sure that it felt like I wasn't like pulling punches. Like it was really like what was the strongest like for the story, but also that it like actually meant something instead of it just being like I ticked a box, someone got murdered.
Yeah, no, you did that. Okay. Yeah, and speaking of things that mean things, so the horses are obviously literal, but there are also a lot of like horse metaphors and horse descriptions. So like, what do the horses represent other than like the animals? Yeah,
I mean, so for me, this whole novel was about like kind of what I alluded to earlier is like a central question that I don't think that there's an easy answer to. And the central question for me was kind of like, is it ever okay to push your kids? But then beyond that, it's like, is it ever like, how do you wield the influence that you have over another living thing? Like, whether that be your child, your friend, and then a rider and a horse, right? It's like this whole having this sort of power and what is the best way to use that, because you have to use it in some way, right? So
Yeah, I mean, I was really moved by the conversation around, like, if a horse does everything you say, that's not a good thing. Like, that means you've
Yes.
broken it, which I feel like is what you're talking about.
oh, totally, yeah, and it is honestly a thing in the horse world that it's like it's called learned helplessness, and it's like now like I think that in the past, like let's say I don't know, like just it's the dialogue around like horses. I think has changed a lot, like in the equestrian world, because I think there used to be it's very easy to train a horse, but people think that because it's this big animal, they feel powerful, but it's actually really easy. Like you could go pull a horse out of like the wild, and you could be riding it within hours. That's how easy it is. But it's like a lot of people use like violence and aggression to control horses, and then they get these horses that they think are really well behaved, but it's actually what we call it would be like learned helplessness. So the horses realize that there's like no point to fight, right? So they're just super.
It's so sad.
I do, yeah. But it's like people will think that it's like a well-behaved horse, but really it's just like he's terrified into total submission, where it doesn't even like it's not even like a horse anymore, right?
Right, which I think was also happening with daughters a little bit.
Yeah.
Where it's like that tension between like giving up on what they want in order to do whatever their mom says versus like being themselves.
Yeah, and I think it was interesting. Like I was reading somebody talking about the book, and it was something I hadn't thought about before. But they kind of like highlighted how it does come in a way from both sides, because like Maple, the younger daughter, like she idolizes her mom. She wants so much to please her. So it's not like it's just her enforcing it on the daughter, but it's the daughter almost wanting to like help her mom, who she sees being unhappy, and also just kind of like please her, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, and receive her love.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So speaking of the people, this is set in the world of wealthy people. What is it about that world that's so interesting?
I don't know. You know what? Like, because I've actually thought about this. Because like my last book is Good Rich People, and it's about like wealth too. And I've actually like kind of thought about this, because before I was, I guess so, like not too long ago, like when I was married and I was living in London, I lived below the poverty line for like probably like a decade. And then I started selling books, and I started making all this money. So even though I'm not like super rich, to me, I feel like I'm extremely wealthy. Like I'm more wealthy than I ever would have imagined me being, to me, right? And I think that I'm kind of uncomfortable with it. And I feel like that's why I keep writing books like about wealth, because it's like me kind of like grappling with something that maybe doesn't feel real to me, and then also that you're not really sure if it's even okay. To be honest.
No, that makes sense. And especially making money off of books, which like
well, it's very up and down,
yeah. And few people can say that.
Yeah.
So I get that. I mean, the tensions are really interesting when there's all this money at stake, because it's like, if you don't have money, you have this fantasy that like once you have all of these things, that solves all these problems.
Yeah,
and
it does solve a lot though.
Sure.
That's one thing I do have to say, is that I feel like everyone always sort of says, I'm like, oh, but money can't buy it. It's like, it actually buys a lot. And I think if given the choice, every time I would choose to have money. But I guess it doesn't mean that it's not without this kind of like, so I would say like psychic troubles, you know what I mean?
Yes, completely. And I think, like, as you showed in the book, like, it does make people go insane.
Yeah.
Like,
especially if you think you can buy all the horses you can buy with that money.
I mean, right, like, that was where the money was going, instead of, like,
as it should.
Sure, yes, as it should. So what are you working on next?
Okay, so my books are all like super duper different. So my next book is actually totally different. Basically, it's like a much more plot forward story. So it's like a story about, it's like a guy and a girl. They meet on this sleeper train going from Florence to Paris, and they like kind of have like a little flirt, a little like before sunset kind of moment, and like hook up. And he disappears, and we find out it's because earlier he was shot. And he kind of like passes out, right? So she thinks that he's ditched her, and he wakes up and she's gone. And the reason he was shot is because he's a contract killer, and she's also a contract killer, but neither of them knows it. So it's like a little Mr. and Mrs. Smith, right? So they think they're never going to meet each other again. And then 6 months later, in the Palace of Versailles, like the Hall of Mirrors, they like run into each other. Like, what are the chances? And it turns out actually one of them has been assigned to kill the other one. So it kind of like takes off from there, and it's this very like cross-country adventure, twisty, through Europe, like all over Europe. It's like I lived in Europe for a long time, so I thought it'd be fun to set some there. But yeah, just super like fun and like very like big set piece. So I was like, why not?
That sounds
There's no
amazing.
budget. It's a book.
The budget will come when it gets
there. Well, green screen. There we go.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I would love to take questions from the audience.
How much do you rate per day?
I mean, I guess it depends. Like if I'm like sort of like, I guess like when I'm actively working, because obviously that's what you're asking, because I take a lot of time off if I can. I try to like, if I'm drafting, I try to hit like 3,000 words a day, probably. I feel like my problem sometimes, to be honest, is working too fast and then it just not being good or being sloppy because I get like super excited and
Well, do you commit a certain time? I mean, you get it, like going to work type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like every morning I'll like go and like do my little chores, feed my horse, go to the dog park, and then I'll just sit down until like lunch, and then take a break. But yeah, I try to kind of have, if I hit my word count goal, I'll stop early. I'm very much like a person that I think you should enjoy your life as much as possible, and I need that for the inspiration. So I'm not like
I don't know the technology. Does it spit out the word count as you go along?
Yeah, on Microsoft Word, yeah.
As opposed to counting the words.
No, yeah. And it's like, so when you're like contracted for a book, usually they'll say, okay, your book is contracted to be like, I think mine are like 85,000. So it's like, that you're like kind of getting somewhere, but it's not, too strict, I guess.
I have a question. So you spoke to it a little bit about doing the massive rewrite for this book, but I'm curious, what was must have been like psychically hard to set down what you had been working on and try something new. Did you have like an aha moment about a new direction to go in, or like how did you kind of navigate that?
I think it's hard like when you're in it, because I think it was hard for me to kind of see what the flaws were, but I feel like what I realized, it's like I just tried to take like an honest stock of what I thought had happened. And I realized, I think, like two big things that helped me. One was that like the book wasn't really meeting what I had pitched, even though like I had shown her those 3 chapters. The actual pitch itself was that it was supposed to be almost like a Big Little Lies kind of thing. And I kind of, because I like horses so much and I'm super passionate about it, I feel like I just kind of got off track, right? So I was like, I need to bring it back into what I originally sold them. And then I also just made things easier on myself because I was realizing the world wasn't accessible to like my editor, for example. So I was like, okay, so I need to have a family, this is what everyone does, right? It works. That's why we do it. It's like they're new to this area, they're new to the sport. So that way you're like inviting the reader in instead of just like talking about stuff that you think is interesting and other people are like, I don't even know what that is. But so I just tried to like sort of structure it and just be super honest about what I was doing wrong, because I was enjoying, like when I was writing all those versions that I ended up throwing out, I was having the time of my life. I was like, this is the best book ever.
Director's cut.
I had to be like, no, maybe not.
Not many questions, so I'll go again. I have a client whose child is in dressage, 11-year-old.
Oh, wow.
Is this type of book that she might be interested
Well,
in?
I mean, so I would say 11 was young. I mean, it's a 5-character ensemble. So there's 2 adults and there's 3 teenagers, but it's like, there's like kind of Mean Girls, there's a sex scene, there's swearing. So it's kind of, I feel like it almost works for teenagers, but it depends on the year.
It's like the kind of book you like steal from your mom when
Yeah.
you're a teenager. And
I mean, it's not as crazy as you thought, and I know a lot.
Totally.
So, I don't know. But yeah, probably 11 might be too young, but I would love to write for that age.
Oh, that would be fun.
I mean, I can never. So I named my horse Tennessee after Tennessee Williams. I really love And then just like, you know what? I hate when people, it's like you can't even think of one out there. Patricia Highsmith, Flannery O'Connor, like that kind of vibe, Donna Tartt. I would say like sort of like the women, you know, swoopy writers. Love that.
Which of the books you've written is your favorite and why?
I don't know. I feel like every book that I'm working on is my favorite. I feel like every, like the one, you know what I mean? Like the last one you did, it's always like, cause I'm always trying to, like, I always feel like it could be my last book that I ever get published. So like, I'm always trying to do like, what's the last thing, if you could only say one thing, like what would you say? You know what I mean? So I think it's always like the current, and you always have that hope too. You're like, this is going to blow everyone away. Everyone's going to love this one, you know? So yeah, whatever I'm working on currently.
What was your favorite place to live in Europe?
And my favorite place. I lived in
And
London. I lived in London for like 7, or I guess, how long did I live there? 10 years. I lived there after for like 10 years. I loved Paris. I mean, but I don't want to live there because there's too many French people. But Ireland's amazing. Yeah, everywhere. Awesome.
We have a question from the live stream. Someone wants to know how you come up with your ideas. Do you pull from your past experiences?
Who was it?
Thomas.
Yeah,
Brazier.
I thought it was my brother. That's what I was asking. I was like, watching me wrong. Do I pull? I mostly just am inspired by my youngest brother. Yeah. That's probably where I pull most stories.
And then one more. Who would be a better wrangler, your mom or dad?
I feel like, I don't know. That's mom's tougher.
Yeah.
But I think that dad kind of has the look. He's got the romantic cowboy look. So depends what you're looking for. It's a good question though.
Sorry, I have a question. It's kind of random. But do you have like a book idea that you would really want to write, but don't think you could sell? Is there some idea that like you keep thinking of?
I feel like I always find a way
Yeah.
to sell it. Like even like this one like that I wrote recently. It's actually like I wrote like I used to write like fan fiction a long time ago, and it's actually like I wrote a fan fiction like 15 years ago, and I always thought that's the best thing I ever wrote. And it was like in Europe, and I was like, how can I like make this? And that's kind of where this came from. So I think that everything like kind of transforms. You know, if you want it bad enough. Never have too many ideas.
What was it fan fiction of?
Not gonna say. That's for the next book tour. If you come to the next one, then you come to the
All right, well, thank you so much.
Thank you.